So, Mark, we've just been to Fox ESS in China. We saw the factory, we spoke to the engineers, and we did a install for one of your old employees.
Yes, from my boss from 20 years ago. So, look, Yorick, I've been really looking forward to this review. I've been on the look for a inverter and battery that is not quite as premium as Fronius. It might not be as perfect as everything, but basically they've got all the ducks in the row, and there's no real issues that we can complain about. And you know what? On a few factory tours now, what did you think of the...
It felt like a real factory, like where they actually make stuff. It's not just a showroom. We've been to a few where obviously it's very sterile. It's obviously there for display. It really felt like we could see each part of it, and it was a working facility.
It was huge too, watching printed circuit boards from right at the beginning right through the end, and then watching the batteries get assembled and everything like that.
Yeah.
It was a massive production line, I think.
And it's not, look, Fox doesn't just make Fox ESS branded batteries. They're an OEM and an ODM manufacturer. So about half of what they produce is actually for other brands.
And we got crazy access with them. We spent 2 full days, Sunday and Monday, with them. We checked out their testing facilities. What did you think about that?
I think it was pretty thorough. I mean, it's not as huge as, say, what we saw at Sungrow, for example, but it was much more substantial than other brands that we'd visited previously.
Yeah. So the testing, like, I do like the fact that even though they're a relatively new company, 2009 is not brand new, and they've been around for long enough that they can do accelerated testing on their products. They tested them in Europe before they brought them to Australia as well.
Yeah.
And they had plenty of accelerated testing chambers where basically they heat the batteries or the inverters up and keep on cycling them to see how long they're actually going to last and find cause with them.
You know what the highlight of the trip for me, Mark? I mean, I think maybe the whole trip was, so I think it's 3 hours with the engineers and getting to nerd out about every little detail. Their faces lit up when I asked them a question. I asked them, if there's anything they could design, with an unlimited budget and unlimited time, what would they do? And
I thought that was a stupid question. And then at the end, they got so excited.
Yeah, because we were thinking, okay, we've taken up 2 hours of their time. We should probably start wrapping up. And then they just wanted to talk and talk and talk. I think, the amount that we learned speaking to Fox was impressive. And also learning about their company culture and their priorities and, things that they're aiming towards. I really felt like I got to get a good feel for what it would be like working with Fox.
Yeah. And 3 hours, no joke, with 3 of the top engineers. And that was from 4 p.m. on Sunday to 7 p.m. on Sunday night or something like that.
Well, it was on a Sunday too. I mean,
it was insane. So it was good times. Yeah.
So no, look, I think in terms of the factory, I was quite impressed. They're currently building another facility just across the road as well, which is going to be 4 times the capacity. So they're not a small player, and I think they're going to be around for quite a long time. We know that they're actively going through an IPO application, so essentially trying to become publicly listed. So, I think we'll see lots of good things from Fox.
Let's get to where the rubber hits the road, Yorick, their inverter. So I think, solar panels these days have become quite a commodity item, and many brands are making a decent panel. You still get crap panels, but most...
Yeah, they're all high efficiency N-type wafers with 25-year warranties. A panel's a panel these days.
The problem I think the industry is making the mistake on now is they're thinking an inverter is an inverter. And to some degree, there's a little bit of truth in that 10 years ago, most inverters from China were boat anchors, we would call them. That's all they were good for, holding your boat still. But I think now inverters are getting a lot better, but you still do get a difference between a premium inverter who have worked everything out, have really focused for many years on just squeezing every bit out of an inverter and longevity, cooling and everything like that.
Well, also, especially when it comes to battery or hybrid inverters, because that inverter is expected to do so much more work now. It's not just converting power from DC to AC. We're wanting it to run 24 hours a day. It needs to do battery control. We're asking a lot of it, backup capabilities. So I guess I know you always look into a few particular points when you're looking at inverters. What were those?
Yeah, so AFCI, which is arc fault circuit interruption, or basically if you have an arc because of fault, it will turn the system off and we won't cause a fire.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have that, which many inverters are starting to get now. A big one is Global Maximum Power Point Tracker, or GMPPT.
Yeah.
And so that's basically like having 4-wheel drive to get you out of a shady situation. So if you've got any shade on your roof, I would recommend you considering spending the extra money and getting a Fronius inverter or an SMA if they're still around.
Sungrow, anything with a good MPPT tracker that can get around that shape.
There's not many to choose from, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have that. I didn't love the plug on it. So when we were installing this particular 15 kilowatt 3-phase inverter, and we'll put a picture up, but there's this plug that you have to put 2 really big 6mm cables into, circular cables.
Yeah, these are 3-phase cables, so they're chunky.
Yeah. And plug it in, and there's a lot of pressure on that. And when we were doing it, even though like first time doing it, my Sparky actually cracked a little flimsy bit of plastic. That didn't just crack the plug, it cracked the inverter side of it. So Fox were good enough to replace the whole inverter. I'd be concerned that often that goes in, gets cracked, probably a fairly common thing to do.
Could be, yeah.
And doesn't get replaced.
And look, I think with the current climate, especially since there was a big recall just recently on AC connectors.
With SIG Energy.
Yeah, I wasn't going to name names, but the reality is that, these things are important. So hopefully there is a bit of a redesign on that portion of the inverter.
Yeah. So generally I say, look, it's an okay inverter. You're not paying premium price. You're not getting a premium inverter. But inverters, to some degree, are inverters. So yeah.
I also agree. I think it's a good average inverter. I don't think it does anything particularly special, but it's also not a crap boat anchor.
And you checked out the app?
I did, yeah. So I have mixed feelings about the app. So I like a lot of data. I'm definitely a bit of a nerd when it comes to solar and battery systems, but I think for the average consumer, having too much information presented at once can be a bit overwhelming and difficult to digest.
Yeah.
So there is actually the old app, there's a new one. I personally found it quite cluttered, but for the nerd who wants to get all the information and have it all on readily at their fingertips, I think it definitely has some pros.
Maybe that's why I liked it.
I think for me, I like simplicity is key. I think there is definitely something to say about a level of minimalism, at least on the front page. I don't think it's a bad app.
Yeah, it's fine. One thing that I learned about it, which I think is a good trick, is if you're not totally oversizing your battery, they've got a reserve setting at 10% of the battery. So you never discharge more than 90% of your battery unless you're in a blackout.
Yeah.
Fronius has got 7%, but we can adjust that. Where with Fox, we can adjust that down to 0.
Yeah.
So I think that's potentially not a bad idea.
I don't think it's a bad idea. I'd caution dropping it all the way down to 0. You want to have the battery last a long time, even if it is fairly cost effective. So I guess there's
pros and cons.
To all of that.
So pass-through current, I think we'll touch on that later, but that is a bit of a concern that I've got with the inverter.
Especially for the 3-phase HD Smarts.
But we have got negatives coming, so we might hit on that one a little bit later.
Let's deep dive into that at the end of the video. You know what I was really impressed with the Fox system?
The battery itself.
The battery itself. Look, it's a fairly simple battery. It's a high voltage battery architecture. I like the fact that they do a master and slave setup. So, for example, with the BYD or even Sungrow, Fronius Reserva, they all have a separate BMU or the battery management unit, which is the dark gray component of the BYD battery. And then you have the battery modules underneath. What Fox have done is that they make the top battery module a master, which is got the BMU in it as well as the battery module. And then each one below is a slave. And so the cost difference between the two is negligible, which makes doing multiple battery stacks much more cost effective. I also like the fact that you don't have to buy a separate BMS and base unit because the feet screw in directly to the bottom module. Not great if you've got standing water, but to be fair, you shouldn't be putting a battery where it's going to get flooded in the first place. I think it just makes for a really neat packaging. The other thing that surprised me, because it's very compact, was how much internal space there was inside that battery module.
So when I did the short review, when we installed the battery or when we were testing it, I sort of knocked it on. I said, look, that's jam-packed full of batteries, which I thought is what they did because that's what SIG Energy does, right?
My first thought was, they must be using blade batteries because, you get that energy density in them. But they're not. They're actually using these 100 amp hour cells and about 14 of them for a 4.6, 4.8 kilowatt hour battery module. They've got them strapped together, and also what they've done is got a pretty good, maybe a good inch worth of space all the way around that battery cell.
And I think what we're finding out, that is more common. It's uncommon to do what SIG Energy is doing and not leaving that air cap there.
Yeah, and actually this is where one of the things we talked about with the engineers was I said, I mentioned that I was surprised about that, and they said they did it because it was for safety and for cooling. So they could have actually made the battery container or the module smaller, which would have saved on material cost and shipping, but it would have sacrificed the safety of that battery. So the more we're learning about these battery modules, safety is always the number one priority. One thing we did notice was there's no little aerosol can in them, but then I'm not...
That's an interesting debate, that one.
Yeah, I personally don't think that's necessary. I personally feel that it's probably more marketing and now also what customers are expecting, partly because of the clever marketing from some providers.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with you. We talked with quite a few different engineers from different companies while we're over there, and I used to think it was marketing. Having a fire extinguisher and a battery like this is like whizzing on a bushfire. It's not going to get you very far.
Yeah.
But some of them over there sort of explained, we won't explain here, how it is actually quite effective, especially when we got to SunGrow with their commercial batteries. So it is curious, though, how more premium brands like Fronius, BYD, and even the SunGrow residential battery are not doing it. So I don't know. If anyone knows a little bit more about this, I'd be more curious. But I think there is a
great comment in the video below.
Yeah, but I think it is more than marketing fluff.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think it's always good to have a fire extinguisher. This is just for life in general, but it's also better to have a system designed that you don't need it in the first place.
Well, that was their response, the engineers at Fox's response. How about you design it not to run really hot in the first place? Fair play, because that's what you get when you use these big commercial cells.
Yeah.
They really heat up and maybe you need to, if you're running this battery to the limit, by the way, this is what you get sort of in SIG Energy batteries and
or Anchor or
Huawei's, yeah. But yeah, these lower batteries. Oh, let me quickly go through different batteries. So you're saying this is a Fronius cell?
Yeah, so the Reserva's got the 30 amp hour cell, which is not specifically that one, but it's roughly that size.
Yeah.
This is 100 amp hour, and this is 320 amp hours.
So that's about a kilowatt hour as well.
Correct. It's about a third of a kilowatt hour.
Yep. So yeah, the difference is these batteries are designed for commercial. You can see it's a lot harder to cool them, so you don't want to run them at such high current. And if you are, you're running, like for the SunGrow commercial battery, sort of the smaller commercial batteries, they've got air cooling in them to take them away.
Yeah, and when we're looking at, say, industrial size battery systems, so like 5 megawatt hour packs that you use for a solar farm, these are actively cooled with liquid cooling. There's refrigerants in them. They're really trying to suck a lot of the heat out of these battery packs, and it's hard to do so because there's so much volume.
And it's not just the volume, but because you're stringing it shorter, especially in residential batteries, you're not putting as many of these in there, so your voltage doesn't get up. You necessarily have to have your current really high, and you get these I square R losses where the higher the current, it's just exponential how much heat you get out of that battery. So
correct. So there is a real advantage of using slightly more smaller cells. They just don't get anywhere near as hot because there's not as much current running through them.
And then you have the disadvantage of the small one is that when you keep on stringing it together, you're ending up with a lower voltage. So you get to a higher voltage quicker, so you can only get like a 20 kilowatt hour battery with this one.
Yeah.
Where this one here, you can get like up to a 50 kilowatt hour battery.
So I think the long story short is we are very strong proponents for high voltage battery systems. They're more efficient. They run cooler. I reckon they're a lot simpler, so you don't need DC to DC converters, which are generating heat, reducing efficiency. And I think you're just getting a much more reliable battery system long term. So I've got no doubts that the Fox batteries.
And this is one way that I've thought about it, Yorick. Years ago, I used to think the difference between batteries is AC coupled versus DC coupled.
Yeah,
that was the argument.
And I would have agreed with you back in the day.
And the real argument with what's on the market now is a high voltage battery versus a DC to DC converter battery, like those three systems that we've described. I don't think it's really an argument. Having a high voltage battery is definitely more efficient. And let me get onto that point.
Yeah, so you've been doing round trip efficiency testing. I know we've talked about this in previous videos, but like, what were the results? We've got a bit of pushback on that.
Yeah, okay. So to quickly explain it, just to give you round figures, let's say you put 10 kilowatt hours of power into your battery.
Yeah.
You would expect to draw maybe 9 out of it because you're going to lose a little bit on the efficiency, right?
Yeah, maybe less if you're pulling it out slower.
Yeah. So when we test these high voltage batteries, and this is the same with all the high voltage batteries we've done, Fronius, BYD, Fox.
Yeah.
And I'm sure SunGrow is going to be the same. When I've tested them, if you charge them fast and discharge them fast, the inverter likes that. The batteries are fine with that. And so you get around about 89 or something like that % efficiency.
So what was Fox in that case?
And Fox was up there around 89. So good battery. Now, when you charge it fast, because that's what the sun normally does. It charges your battery up by lunchtime. And you discharge it slow because that's what happens overnight,
Yeah, fridge running, maybe TV, just lights.
You lose a whole lot of efficiency. And all of these high voltage batteries, not just Fox, got down to 74% efficiency.
74, 75. I mean, if we compare that to say, look, let's not pick on Sig. Let's use Anchor as an example. What was that?
Well, all three of these DC to DC converter batteries are down at 63%. So the difference of sort of a real world comparison of the efficiency you get getting out of it is 74%. To all three of these batteries were very close to 63%. So it's not a measurement issue.
You're losing over 35% of your battery capacity just in those conversion losses.
And you're losing a good 10% more. Now, what I've heard pushback when we make comments like this is they're saying that's fine, just put more panels on. You oversize your array anyway, right?
Yeah, and look, you can definitely do that up until a point. But I think the thing is, look, from the 1st of May, the battery rebate's going to be reducing. It's not going to make a lot of sense to put these big 50 kilowatt hour batteries on, I think, for that much longer. I think efficiency and keeping the battery cells cool is actually more important. And that's why I'm a big proponent for high voltage.
Yeah, and that's probably more the point. It's not efficiency. You're right. You can put more panels on there, and maybe efficiency isn't the most important
thing. You can buy more battery
if you're getting a cheap battery anyway.
Yeah.
But probably more the point is that I square R losses is you're just heating this sucker up. You're heating it up with a DC converter next to it. We're not doing that with Fox high voltage batteries. Heat is just degrading the battery. It's degrading the electrolyte. It's degrading the anode. It's degrading the cathode.
Yeah.
You get faster degradation.
It's a long-term investment. You want it to last. So anyway, so we spoke a lot about the batteries, though we very briefly mentioned pass-through. So look, this is where I made a little bit of a mistake on our test system. I thought, well, I've got a 15 kilowatt three-phase inverter. I can pump out a lot of power. I can back up the whole house. It just is not the case with Fox, unfortunately.
Yeah, we found that out almost too late. Is that you can't back up the whole house on the particular, what is the model?
It's the H3 Smart
model, which is the current model of inverters. So only when we switch to three-phase, we've got this problem. Now, let me explain it to you. Maybe in this way, right?
Yeah, explain it to me.
After we installed this system, we realized that this was a problem, that we can't back up a whole house. So we backed up a handful of circuits, thinking that we had done the right job, right? And this was before Christmas. And then I went to New Zealand on holidays, and remember, it was my boss's place. So I got from 20 years ago. So my old boss, who taught me a lot about
electricity. Under the bus.
It was very embarrassing. He calls me up and goes, "Oh, my house is tripped." And I'm like, "Oh, goodness, what have we done?" It turns out that we had drawn more than 20 amps through one of his circuits. And the inverter trips off. So this is not in a blackout situation, but even when you're on grid, there is this contactor within the inverter that can't take more than 20 amps on grid. So what it really means, if you're backing up on one of these larger 15 kilowatt inverters, all you can do is run one power circuit on one phase, one power circuit on another phase, and maybe one light circuit on another phase.
I'd say two, but I might be a bit more daring than you are.
Yeah. Then you can take the phone calls. So that's really limited for a 15 kilowatt inverter. If you are on like 8 kilowatt Fox Smart inverter, three-phase, it's even worse. You've got 10 amps. So basically you can do 3 light circuits. You wouldn't even back up a power point.
And the problem with this is that because the power is running through the inverter, even when you're connected to the grid, when you're off-grid in a blackout, you tend to be a lot more conservative with your usage, but 5 kilowatts per phase on day-to-day usage, as soon as you've got anything like a toaster and a kettle on one phase, you're very likely to trip that circuit, and everything that's on the backup side then goes. So I think it is a bit of a design flaw. Now, fortunately, there was a solution. And so we're currently designing or building a gateway for this particular case, but Fox don't have one from the factory.
No, they don't have one in Australia, but we can build that and sort it, because it's my boss, obviously. Old boss, I have to sort it out. I'd sort it out anyway, but we're going to build a gateway so that we can, instead of using that small contactor in the inverter, we'll put a contactor externally and run it that way. And then we can back up the whole house as you sold. And
look, if it's also one of those things too, if I was wanting to back up the whole house now, the new Fox ESS H3 Pro has just come out. So this is the 15 kilowatt and up. These have much larger internal contactors, which means that you're much less likely to trip it. But it was a bit of a
15 kilowatts up.
They do 15 kilowatts up to 33.
Oh, so that customers are still going to have problems with the 10 kilowatt inverter with Fox.
And it's a significant price jump too.
So I didn't quite realize that. Here's a hot tip. don't buy a Fox 3-phase 7 kilowatt, 9 kilowatt, 10 kilowatt inverter. 10, I think. No, yeah, or 10 kilowatt inverter.
Yeah.
If you want backup, just don't buy that. Single phase, not a problem with single phase. With the new Pro version, it's going to cost quite a bit more.
Yeah.
But we'd suggest you go with that too.
Definitely. So the other thing we've heard a little bit about it. Look, we raved on about Solax's customer support. This is something that's a little bit lacking, unfortunately, in the Fox, at least for Australia at the moment. I might actually give them a bit of a call right now and see if I can get through.
Yeah, so we have been calling over the last week or whatever, probably half a dozen times or something like that. And you know what? Maybe not even half a dozen times, but we've not got through once. We've been able to leave a message.
We need a moment to find an available support agent.
But this happens all the time. They might still answer the phone, so
We may use our phone service provider to record the call for training, quality, and analytics purposes. If you would like to leave a voicemail, you may dial 1 at any time.
Well, straight to voicemail, basically.
Well, no, they might still answer. So I've been talking with Fox about this, and they realise it's a big problem. And a little bit of the problem is, a big bit of the problem is they took 25% market share within like 12 months. So having to scale your support staff that quickly is just impossible when Sig Energy has stolen all the support staff in the industry anyway. Right?
They needed it at the moment. Yes.
So it's really hard. But I think the other issue is budget inverters and batteries attract budget companies.
It is a bit unfortunate, especially when there's a race to the bottom. There is a lot of incentives for people to undercut and cut corners. And when it's a cheap battery, a cheaper inverter, I mean, it's a great price to, performance proposition. But the reality is that you're not going to get the best installation. And a lot of times, these guys aren't really understanding the product.
So that really is a problem. And I've seen comments on Facebook and online, and people just assume that because Fox is cheap, that is crap. So quality installers won't go anywhere near it because they don't want to get stitched up. Yeah. I think we know better. Fox is not a crap product.
I think it's actually quite a reasonable brand.
Few things like probably the plug and the pass-through current. A few things that you need to watch out for. But it's going to be hard for you to find a quality installer that will take on Fox as a standard product, I think. I think more should. I think the other problem is in the industry is that Fox have chosen one of the worst wholesalers in the market to supply their product.
That's a bit unfair on Solar Juice, Mark.
Not Solar Juice. Solar Juice. We don't buy much of Solar Juice, but Solar Juice is one of the best suppliers on the market. So they've sort of chosen one of the worst and one of the best suppliers on the market. And those kind of suppliers attract really dodgy installers as well. And the problem is when everyone is selling batteries like hotcakes at the moment. And so no one's got enough install capacity. So many companies are just calling on the 22-year-old that's just finished the apprenticeship to jump in his van and try his hardest to get a battery install done. Those young installers or dodgy installers maybe as well don't know what they're doing. So they're clogging up the phone lines. And then, this is a funny story, is when we got back from Fox, they did a Facebook post saying, we went to their factory and stuff like that, which was kind of nice, very nice of them.
Yeah.
And there was one comment on there that an end customer, was whinging that the installation company, who will remain unnamed, don't answer their phones. They had a problem with their Fox battery system, and the installation company, or the sales company is probably the name, was dodgy. And then they were blaming Fox and saying Fox doesn't even answer their phones.
Yeah, but it's not Fox's responsibility to answer customer direct questions. I mean, they should be going through their installer, who should then be contacting support.
So the problem is just this big cycle is they've got these installers that don't know what they're doing, clogging up their phones. We're still on hold, by the way. They've got end customers that don't get help from the dodgy companies that are selling it, clogging up their support. They've really got a problem that somehow they need to be able to switch from having a budget product that they get to know. And well, here's news for the quality installers. I call this a decent product, right? And quality installers need to be installing Fox, I think.
Yeah. So look, we speak about, we've got a good reputation. How do you choose a company that will do good work and look after you? And I think there's a few little tips we have for that.
Yep.
I mean, I think the number one thing is to just read reviews, do your background checks. Simple things like just checking to make sure they've got a storefront. If you can visit them in person, that's usually a big pro, because if you've got the effort, putting in the money and effort to have a showroom, that's often a good sign.
Yeah, instead of working out of the third bedroom or something.
Yeah. ABN lookup. So look, a company that's been around for a long time generally has been around a long time because they do quality work as well. And we encourage our customers to do this on us as well. The other thing too is, test their knowledge. I always, obviously, it's a hard thing as a customer if you don't have a good understanding of these products to really ask curly questions, but it never hurts just to probe the sales rep or probe their customer support.
Well, I think that's a good one. Pick up the phone to their customer support, see if you can get onto someone and try to come up with a smart question to see if the customer support is actually any good as well.
Just because a company doesn't use subcontractors is not necessarily a terrible sign. We do everything in-house, and it's, our apprentices have stayed on and matured through and that generally we've got, I think, very good installers, if not some of the best in the industry. But when they were very heavily sales focused, that can also attract, when the installers aren't getting paid a fair wage, they're generally it's hard to put a lot of effort into making sure it's done right as well. So
yeah. I would say, I think sometimes it's a little bit unfair to bag out on the subcontractor model.
Yeah.
I think at the moment it's fair play because there's, like I was saying before, there's so much work in the industry that sales companies can't keep up with it, and they're just throwing anyone that they can get, throwing money at any young installer to chuck the batteries in with limited training.
Yeah. But when it's a race to the bottom and going just with the cheapest quote, the reality is someone's going to be cutting corners somewhere, and usually that's customer support and post-sale, repairs and help. So I think there is a good reason to shop around, ask questions and maybe don't go for the bottom.
Yeah. Okay. So in summary, the way that you can get a quality Fox install done is avoid their under 10 kilowatt or 10 and under kilowatt three-phase inverters.
Yep.
Because you're not going to get backup unless backup isn't a concern for you. Go for their smart inverters if you're going for three-phase, 15 kilowatts or larger.
Yep.
Single phase, you're pretty well fine.
Yeah, get the Pro.
Make sure you get a good installer. And here's a little cheeky one, right? I'll shout out to my friends at Solar Juice. We don't actually buy it from Solar Juice, but ask them who supplies their Fox batteries, the company. And if they say Solar Juice, they've just already gone up in my estimation.
Because the thing is, the wholesalers often can provide a lot of support as well.
Yeah. Or it's just a sign of a good company, I think.
Yeah.
Dealing with good people.
Yeah.
So, Yorick, I think that's a wrap.
No, I think it is as well. Look, so Mark, the real curly question for you is, are we bringing on Fox?
Oh, I was hoping you weren't going to ask me that. But no, the short answer is no. Not because I have a real problem with the product in itself. We just are not going to bring on every product.
No.
We have been looking at other products in the industry that are a bit more budget. We probably won't even bring them on at MC Electrical itself, but we've got this other project going on. Just because we attract customers that like premium, all the bells and whistles of Fronius,
So we'll keep searching, and maybe we'll have a video on another product coming out soon.
Okay.
All right. See you next time.
See ya.